Daniel Harper adjusted the strap of his worn backpack as he stepped into the neighborhood cafe. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, skipped beside him, holding his hand with complete trust. Every Friday morning, before school, they shared one hot chocolate and a blueberry muffin. It wasn't much, but to Lily, it felt like a celebration. Daniel smiled as she laughed. Those little moments made every sacrifice worthwhile. 3 years earlier, Daniel had lost his wife, Emma, to a sudden illness. Since then, he had been both father and mother to Lily. He worked nights as a warehouse supervisor and spent his days raising his daughter. Money was tight, sleep was rare, but he never complained. As long as Lily smiled, he believed everything would somehow be okay. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversations. Office workers checked emails, students studied, an elderly couple shared breakfast near the window. Daniel noticed only one empty table. Unfortunately, someone else wanted it. A sharply dressed man in an expensive suit walked toward the same table. His polished shoes clicked confidently across the floor. He looked Daniel up and down before sneering. "I'll take that table." Daniel smiled politely. "I think we reached it at the same time." The man laughed. "People like you don't argue with people like me." Several customers glanced over. Daniel remained calm. "My daughter is tired. We'd just like to sit down." The businessman rolled his eyes dramatically. "I have an important meeting." Daniel nodded. "So do I." The man looked confused. "You?" Daniel simply smiled. "My meeting is with my daughter." Lily giggled. Some customers smiled. The businessman did not. Instead, his face darkened. Without warning, he shoved Daniel hard against the shoulder. Daniel stumbled backward, crashing into another table. Coffee spilled across the floor. Lily screamed, "Daddy!" The cafe fell silent. The businessman straightened his jacket. "Learn your place." A waitress rushed over. "Sir, you can't do that." The man shrugged. "Then call security." Daniel slowly stood, checking first that Lily wasn't hurt. "I'm okay," he whispered to her. She hugged him tightly. "I don't like him." Neither did anyone else. But before anyone could react further, the front door opened. An older gentleman wearing a simple navy coat quietly entered the cafe. Most people didn't recognize him. The businessman did. His confident expression disappeared instantly. Mr. Bennett." The elderly man calmly looked around the room, noticing the spilled coffee, frightened child, and Daniel brushing himself off. His voice remained soft. "What happened here?" Nobody answered. Finally, the waitress spoke. "This gentleman pushed him because of a table." Mr. Bennett slowly turned toward the businessman. "Is that true?" The man's voice shook. There was a misunderstanding." "No." Lily spoke before anyone else. "You pushed my daddy." The cafe became even quieter. Mr. Bennett walked over to Lily and knelt beside her. "Were you scared?" She nodded. "A little." He smiled kindly. "I'm sorry that happened." Then he stood and faced Daniel. "Are you all right?" Daniel nodded. "We're fine." Mr. Bennett extended his hand. "I'm Charles Bennett." Daniel shook it politely. "Daniel Harper." Several people exchanged confused looks. Who was this older man? The businessman suddenly looked ready to faint. Because everyone in the city knew Charles Bennett. He was the founder and CEO of Bennett Global Industries, a company employing more than 20,000 people. And the man who had started the company from a tiny garage 50 years earlier. Charles looked back at the businessman. "I believe you work for me." The man swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Charles sighed. "I've always said one thing during interviews." He paused. "I can teach skills. I cannot teach character." Nobody spoke. Charles continued. "If you'll bully someone because you think they're poor, someday you'll bully a customer, a coworker, or an employee." The businessman whispered, "I'm sorry." Charles looked directly into his eyes. "You're apologizing because I'm here." Silence. "You weren't sorry when you frightened that little girl." The businessman lowered his head. Charles turned toward the cafe manager. "I'd appreciate today's security footage." "Of course, sir." The businessman desperately tried again. "Please, don't let one mistake ruin my career." Charles answered calmly. "One action rarely ruins a career." He paused. "But character repeated over time certainly does." Everyone understood what he meant. The businessman quietly picked up his briefcase. No one stopped him. As he walked out, not a single person looked at him. Instead, every eye remained on Daniel and Lily. Charles smiled warmly. "May I buy breakfast?" Daniel hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know, but I'd like to." Minutes later, the three sat together at the window. Charles listened as Lily proudly explained that her father made the best pancakes in the world. Daniel laughed. I think she's slightly biased. I am not, Lily insisted. Charles smiled. I believe her. For nearly an hour, they talked, not about business, but about family. Charles learned about Emma, about Daniel working night shifts, about reading bedtime stories after only 3 hours of sleep, about never missing Lily's school performances. Charles listened more than he spoke. Finally, he asked one question. Daniel, what did you do before the warehouse? Daniel looked surprised. I used to manage logistics for a regional shipping company. What happened? My wife became sick. I needed flexible hours, so I resigned. Charles nodded thoughtfully. Before leaving, he handed Daniel a business card. If you're interested, I'd appreciate a conversation next week. Daniel looked confused. You mean, a job interview? Charles smiled. No, I mean a conversation. The following Tuesday, Daniel walked into Bennett Global headquarters. The office overlooked the entire city. Charles welcomed him personally. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Not once did Charles ask about grades or resumes. Instead, he asked about leadership, responsibility, integrity, compassion. At the end, Charles smiled. I already know your qualifications. Daniel frowned. You do. I watched the cafe footage. You checked on your daughter before yourself. You stayed calm after being humiliated. You never insulted the man who pushed you. Charles leaned forward. I can teach management software. I can't teach that. 1 week later, Daniel accepted a position as Director of Operations for Community Logistics, a new division Charles had been planning. The salary completely transformed his life. But even more importantly, it gave him evenings with Lily. No more overnight shifts. No more constant exhaustion. One afternoon, months later, Lily visited Daniel's new office. She looked around proudly. So, you're the boss now? Daniel laughed. Not exactly. Charles happened to walk by. He smiled. I'd say he's exactly the kind of boss people deserve. Lily hugged her father tightly. I knew you were special. Daniel kissed her forehead. No, he looked at Charles. We were simply treated with kindness. Charles gently shook his head. Kindness doesn't create character. It reveals it. Years later, Daniel would often tell new employees about that morning in the cafe. Not about the promotion. Not about the CEO. Not even about the bully. He always ended the story with the same lesson. You never know who is watching. But more importantly, always choose to be the person your child is proud to call their hero. And every time Lily heard that story, she smiled. Because on that ordinary Friday morning, she hadn't just seen her father stand back up after being pushed. She had learned that true strength is not found in power, wealth, or status. It is found in patience, humility, courage, and kindness. Those qualities can silence an entire room, and change a life forever.